Hey there tech fans, Rick here again from the OREI team. In today's video, I'll show you how you can easily extend an HDMI signal over a really long distance to a secondary location using a specialized HDMI extension kit like the one I have in front of me. Now, HDMI has quickly become the common standard for connecting a media device to a display device. But the challenge with HDMI is that it's a low voltage, high bandwidth signal, which means you have to limit the distance between that media device and the display. And in most cases, if you're watching 4K content or 8K content, you'll want to keep that distance around 10 feet, maybe 15 feet at the outset, because inside that HDMI standard are all kinds of other features like CEC and ARC and all kinds of advanced technologies. And the longer you make the cable, the harder it is for that HDMI to transport all of those connections and all of those standards. So if you're connecting a media device up to a display in your living room, you're going to be just fine. But if you'd like to connect that media device to an upstairs room or downstairs in the basement, you'll need to use an HDMI extension kit like this. And at a very basic level, an HDMI extension kit takes the HDMI signal, converts it to some other transport protocol between the two locations, and then converts it back into an HDMI signal at the remote location. And you really have 4 different choices for that connection between those two locations. The easiest is Wi-Fi, which is a wireless connection. So the transmitter takes the HDMI signal, converts it into a wireless signal, broadcasts it throughout your home, and then the receiver picks up that signal, converts it back to an HDMI signal so you can view the content. The challenge with a Wi-Fi connection is that it limits the distance because it can't transmit too far. It also doesn't do a great job of transmitting through walls and other obstructions in your home. And more importantly, it may limit the actual resolution of the content it can transmit. You'll find most wireless or Wi-Fi connection topologies support 1080p, 4K at 30, some support 4K at 60. They're starting to get into that 8K space, but not really, not yet. If you're close enough, you're probably okay. But if it's too far away, or you've got a lot of walls between the locations, that may cause problems for you. So a hardwired connection is always your best choice, and you have 3 choices there. The most basic is using a standard LAN cable, like a Cat6 or a Cat7 cable between the primary and secondary locations. And in that case, the transmitter will convert the HDMI into a signal that can be sent over the Cat cable and then convert it back into HDMI at the remote location. And you can use a standard Cat6 or Cat7 cable. They're very inexpensive and you can run them a long distance. Now, if you're using an HDMI extension kit that's based on Cat6 or Cat7, maybe 100 feet between the two, 200 feet, some actually go 500 feet, but that's about the limit for that LAN cable because again, there's a signal strength issue. Another way to do it is with a coaxial cable. There are kits on the market that'll use a coax cable. They provide about the same length of distance between the two and about the same resolution support. So the choice between LAN and that type of cable is really up to you, whatever's easier to run in your home. Most homes nowadays have a LAN cable between all the rooms in the house, and you can typically use that. The 4th way, which is the one that gives you the greatest distance, is to use a fiber optic cable. So this kit I have in front of me uses a single mode fiber cable that increases the distance between the primary and secondary location up to 25 miles. Think about that. That distance is well beyond in your home. It's between homes. It's really between cities in most cases. So where would you ever use that level of extension? Well, if you had a security camera at a warehouse that you wanted to monitor at a central location, or if you're broadcasting content to a remote office, or if you're sharing content with somebody else, you can share that over that single mode fiber cable. And that's what this kit will do for you. So in those circumstances where you need that ultimate extension of that HDMI signal, this kit will work just fine. Now, what I'd like to do next is actually take a closer look at both modules just to show you the connections that are needed to make that happen. And then I'll actually do a demo here to show you just how easy it'll be to use in your particular situation. And I'll come back one more time and point out a few things that you should look for in any HDMI extension kit you're considering, and specifically what the fiber optics setups offer and things you should look for in this type of setup. So stay tuned. I'll take a closer look next. I'll do the demo, and then I'll come back with a few final thoughts. The kit I'm showing you today is the OREI UHD-FOM40-K, which is a fiber optic HDMI extension kit that fully supports 4K content at up to 60 frames a second for a distance of up to 40 kilometers between the primary and secondary locations with a single mode fiber optic connection between them. The product includes both a transmitter and a receiver module, and both of these feature full metal enclosures, which make them incredibly durable and a great choice for both residential and commercial installations. I'll start with the transmitter module. On either side of the cabinet, you'll find ventilation slots that are designed to let any heat that develops during operation escape and keep the electronics inside at a very comfortable temperature. You'll also find mounting holes on both sides that can be used with the bracketing kit to mount the module up off the ground and out of the way. On the front of the module, starting on the left, you'll find a reset button. You can use that to reset the module if needed once power is applied by holding it in for a couple of seconds. To the right of that is a power indicator. The minute you add power to the module, it immediately starts an internal power on self-test where it checks the electronics, and once it passes that test, it'll light that LED letting you know it's ready to use. To the right of that is an activity indicator. Once you power up both modules and you make the fiber optic connection between them and you connect this up to a media device, all of those connections are checked, and once this module starts transmitting HDMI signals across the fiber optic cable, this LED will come on solid. So under normal operation, both the power and activity LEDs should be on. This kit includes an audio injection feature, which allows you to inject audio at the transmitter side that's being played at the remote side. And if you'd like to take advantage of that feature, you can plug a left and right 3.5mm connection in here to your audio source to inject that audio. To the right of that is an RS-232 connection block. This kit also allows you to transmit RS-232 control signals between the primary and secondary locations, and if you'd like to take advantage of that feature, you can connect that right here. To the right of that is an upgrade port. It's a micro USB port that's used for updating the firmware if needed later on, and to accomplish that upgrade, you'll connect this to a local computer with a micro USB cable, move the firmware file to the module to complete that upgrade. On the rear of the modules where you'll make all your connections, starting on the left you'll find a DC input port. That's used with the included power supply. You'll simply plug that power supply into a wall outlet. The other end of the cable has a barrel connection on it which plugs in right there and provides all the power you'll need for operation. To the right of that is another port. It's a 3.5mm port labeled IR out. This kit features infrared blasters that will collect up the remote control signals from that secondary location and send those back over the same fiber optic cable to here where they're rebroadcast so you can actually remotely control the content you're watching. So there are two modules in the kit. One is labeled IR out and the other one's IR in. You want to plug the IR out module here and locate it near your media equipment. To the right of that is a full-sized HDMI port labeled HDMI in. This connects to whatever media device you'd like to share the content from with your remote location. And to the right of that is an HDMI output port. This kit also features local loopback functionality, which allows you to enjoy the content here that you're simultaneously sharing with the remote location. And if you'd like to take advantage of that feature, you can connect this port to a local monitor to enjoy that content. It's very important you use a high-quality HDMI cable for both of these connections to ensure the best possible resolution. Finally, to the right of that is where the fiber optic cable connects. And again, you'll use a single mode fiber optic cable between the primary and secondary locations. The receiver module is very similar. Again, full metal enclosure, ventilation slots, mounting holes for the brackets. On the front of the unit, another reset button, power indicator, activity indicator, another connection for RS-232. So if you're using that feature, you'll make a connection here at the remote location. Another upgrade port. On the rear of the module, the other fiber optic cable connection right there. That's the other end of the fiber cable from the primary site. To the right of that is an infrared in port. It's a 3.5mm port. That's the second infrared module. We'll plug in right there. If you're using the audio injection feature at the primary side, you can make a connection from here to an amplifier or a soundbar to enjoy that audio. To the right of that, a full-sized HDMI port labeled HDMI out. This connects to the monitor at the remote location that you'd like to use to enjoy the content. And then finally, to the right of that is another DC input port that's used at the second power supply. Just plug that into a wall outlet, plug the barrel connection in there, and that'll provide all the power you'll need for operation. That's pretty much it for the kit. Now I'll show you just how easy it'll be to use this product to extend your own HDMI media content from one location to a secondary location over a single mode fiber optic cable up to 25 miles away. And for this demonstration, over here I've set up a small media player that's currently looping a video on this monitor, and that's the media content I'd like to share with my remote location. Over here I've set up a second monitor, and this is the remote location where I'd like to enjoy the content from the primary side. In front of me, I have the transmitter module here and the receiver module here. Now the first set of connections I'll make are to the transmitter, and I'll start by disconnecting the media player from the monitor and plugging that cable into the HDMI input port in the back of the transmitter. And now I'm ready for power. I've already plugged in the power supply. The other end of that cable has a barrel connection on it, which plugs directly into the DC input port in the transmitter. And now we can connect up the receiver at the remote location. I have another HDMI cable connected to this monitor, and I'll plug that into the HDMI output port on the receiver, and I'll add power. Again, I've plugged the power supply in. The other end of the cable has a barrel connection on it, which plugs in right there. The only thing we're missing at this point is the fiber optic cable between the two locations, and that can be a single mode fiber optic cable up to 25 miles in distance. And I've got a short fiber optic cable right here I'll use for that connection, and I'll plug that into the receiver, and then I'll plug the other end of it into the transmitter. And once I make this connection, the units have already started their power on self-test where they've checked the electronics. This one's checked the resolution of the media device. This one's checked the resolution of the monitor. And they're handshaking right now to make whatever adjustments are needed to give you the best possible picture. And there you go. So what you're viewing here is HDMI media content from the primary side that's been converted into a signal that's being sent over this fiber optic cable all the way to the remote location and then converted back into an HDMI signal for display on this monitor. And again, this can be up to 25 miles away, which is pretty incredible. Now, one other feature that this product provides is called local loopback, which allows you to continue to enjoy the content here while you're simultaneously broadcasting it to the remote location. And to take advantage of that feature, you'll need one additional HDMI cable, which I have right here. And you'll plug that into a local monitor at the primary location, and the other end of the cable will plug directly into the HDMI output port on the transmitter. Now, the minute I plug this in, the transmitter realizes I've connected another monitor. It has to do adjustments again to balance out the resolution between the two locations, and it takes a second or two for that to happen. And there's the primary side, and in a second you'll see the remote come up. And there you go. So what you're viewing again is HDMI media content at the primary side, so you can enjoy it here while you're sharing it over the single mode fiber cable to the remote location on that secondary monitor. And it really is just that easy to get it working. I hope that closer look and demonstration were helpful. Now here are a few really important things to keep in mind when you're searching for an HDMI extension kit to help you share content from one location with a secondary remote location. Your first consideration should always be the resolution that any kit can support. Now, most kits on the market today can easily support 1080p content, and some kits support 4K content at either 30 or 60 frames a second, and some of the newer OREI kits support even higher resolutions like 8K content. So it's really important you find a kit that matches the output resolution of your media equipment and your displays to ensure you'll get the best possible picture at that remote location. And a good idea would be to find a kit that supports a higher resolution at a higher frame rate, because then you can avoid upgrading the equipment as you upgrade your media gear or your display later on. Another important consideration is the distance that any kit supports between the primary and secondary locations. And like I'd mentioned earlier, the simplest way to implement an HDMI extension setup is with a Wi-Fi connection. The problem with Wi-Fi is that the distances tend to be very short and the resolution's lower. So if you're using a Wi-Fi kit, you'll probably get 100, 150 feet in most homes, but you'll be limited to 4K at either 30 or 60. It's very rare to find a Wi-Fi kit that'll support 8K content. The second choice would be a wired connection, and the most typical of those is a LAN connection between the primary and secondary locations. Again, a Cat6 or a Cat7 cable. That's an easy thing to implement, and it allows you to increase that distance to 200 feet, 500 feet, maybe even a little bit longer. So that's a great selection for most homes. If you have to go beyond that 500-foot limit, you're going to need to use a kit like this one that uses fiber optic connections between the primary and secondary, and it's a single mode fiber. So the choice is up to you, but always try to find a kit that provides a little bit longer extension than you think you'll need today, because that provides ultimate flexibility in where you locate that secondary site. Another consideration is both the HDMI and the HDCP certification, because most kits on the market will publish criteria of which standard they adhere to, but you'll want to be sure to check that, because the HDMI standard has gone through a lot of changes in recent years, and like I'd mentioned, there are a lot of new features introduced in the HDMI standard, and to take advantage of those, you'll want to make sure you're on the latest version of HDMI for the resolution of content you're going to be transmitting. HDCP is equally important because that controls copy protection, so you'll want to make sure that whatever kit you choose uses the latest HDCP standard for the resolution you'll be transmitting, and that way you'll have no restrictions on transmitting copyrighted protected material to that secondary location. Other considerations have to do with extra features that the HDMI extension kit may provide. So for example, this kit has a local loopback function on the primary side, which allows you to enjoy the content here while you're simultaneously sharing it with that secondary location. And that's an important feature because if you don't have that, you'll have to unplug the HDMI cable from your display in your primary location, plug it into the transmitter, and you can enjoy it at the secondary location, but you won't be able to enjoy it at the primary at the same time. So local loopback is important. Another important feature would be an infrared blaster kit between the two, because what that does is actually pick up the remote control signals from that secondary location and pass those back over that same LAN connection to the primary location where they're rebroadcast, which allows you to effectively remotely control the content you're watching. So that's a really nice feature. The final feature that I look for is a power over cable technology where essentially a single power supply at either location provides all the power you'll need to operate the entire solution, because if you plug it in at the receiver, it sends the voltage and current needed to run the transmitter over that same LAN cable, which again greatly simplifies your wiring. It just makes it a cleaner installation. So all those things being equal, hopefully you found some value in this review. So thanks an awful lot for watching.